but any cell phone call after 5 minutes, even the ones that have this lower emission, you get a 1 degree increase in brain temperature. And then it went on to say that it is addictive and created opiate-like responses in the double-blind study. So I'm just backing up. What you're saying, again, is mainstream news.
So there's nothing surprising to me about any of this. This is an agenda. People like Brzezinski, who was right in there with the NSA, published some of this stuff in his own books to do with controlling whole populations. And he said populations, not just individuals, and that this technology would be used. And prior to him in the 1950s, you find Lord Bertrand Russell, who also worked for MI5 and 6, publishing the same thing in his Impact of Science on Society book, where he mentioned that the techniques would be used that would bring whole populations to the conclusions, and they'd have no idea that it was even being done to them. And he said, eventually we'll be able to convince absolutely anyone of anything.
Now, I want to move forward from there historically, but let me digress. I wouldn't say you and I and many others are immune, but with any disease, with any program, with any, there's always immune roaches to certain poisons. There's always plants that are immune. There's always people throughout history that are immune or resistant to things. Why, going back about 8-9 years ago, I pretty much quit watching TV because it would irritate me, it would anger me. I knew stuff was going on there. I mean, why, just with the social programming, why did Alan Watt, why, or Alex Jones and millions of others, why are we at least resistant?
Well, I think the precursor that set up the whole field for this to work for the elite was the inoculations. They were the initial precursors that set up the brain structure by attacking the brain. Now, in all weaponry, they go for the biggest kill for the buck, basically. In other words, as many people as possible, but not everyone. That's how all weapons generally work. And we find that there are people with different physiologies. And people who tend to have allergies, etc., can also divert toxins away from the brain that would normally be uptaken by the brain, and they'd be diverted elsewhere. So they end up having sometimes problems, stomach, gastric problems, lower bowel problems, stuff like that, where this stuff has been drawn to and has settled in, but it did not go to the brain. And I've found that with a lot of people who are really awake and have been most of their lives. I try to find the common denominators in them, and I talk to them, and that is one thing that a lot of them have, are these what seem simple allergies, but pretty persistent allergies, but their brains are quite clear. But we also possibly can have slightly different wave patterns that at present are not under these microwave and ELF type frequencies. They might get round to that eventually. Well,
I mean, you mentioned the first big insult before the mass programming begins at birth with the shots. When we were young, we didn't get as many shots or no shots, and I have seen that as a correlating factor. People in the country, I mean, here's an example. I've had a lot of medical doctors on about this. One of them, Dr. Eisenstein, has one of the biggest practices in Illinois. I mean, out of over 100,000 Amish in just a 3-county area, none of them have autism. None of them have any neurological problems. And then he did a study and looked at other studies around the country, in Pennsylvania and other places where you have Amish. They don't have it. It isn't there. But it's the same thing with Dr. Ewan Cameron and the mind control. When they would grab these children in these declassified tests, they would first, for 6 months, as you know, but for the listeners, electroshock them to wipe things out, to create that original insult as a place to then start building the new identity or the new wavelength.
That's right. They did use a lot of children in the MK Ultra tests as well. It wasn't just adults, even though the movie, the CBC, covered it, actually whitewashed more than they showed. And they were using a lot of children. They wiped out their memory to try to build a completely brand new personality that would be robot-like and very obedient, and put them out into society and use them as spies, etc.
So it's the vaccines are acting as the chemical lobotomy or as the electroshock?
No, there's no doubt about it. As I say, Kessler talked about these tests being done back in the 50s and 60s, and under the auspices of the United Nations. And there are different groups who are doing, some of them, like the Soviets, were doing direct lobotomies, physical, mechanical lobotomies. They were also doing that in the United States under the guys who worked for the eugenics programs in the psychiatric institutions. And they were doing prefrontal lobotomies to thousands of troops that came back to the U.S. after World War II and Korea.
Have you ever seen the black and white films of them laughing and just jabbing an ice pick in the troops' head and going and laughing to the students, going, watch this, as the guy's chained down awake, and they just go, ha, 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 ha. I mean, it's the most bloodthirsty stuff you've ever seen with an ice pick. That's
right, and even had traveling, they called him the mobile doctor, who did the lobotomies on behalf of the U.S. government, and he did it out of the back of his van. This was high science, as they called it, and all they were doing was destroying the frontal cortex. Now that's where your behavior is altered, right in the frontal cortex. That's a definite behavior alteration right there, and you do become much more suggestible, very easily managed by authorities, because you have no confidence in your own decision-making powers afterwards.
Well, all of this is really just a scientific codification of total war against our own species by aberrant psychopaths directing human development, and then it isn't just that it's cold-blooded and they want the power. This is a literal wonderland to carry out all the horrors that are horrible to us, but that are beautiful to them.
Absolutely. The public have no idea that war was declared upon them long ago. Total war. All-out war was declared upon every member of the common people, as they put it at the time. The commoners, they were afraid would outbreed them and eventually overthrow them and take over. And they claimed that the world would be in darkness because we're all too stupid to make good and proper decisions. So therefore the idea was they'd have to eliminate the common types, the inferior types that had not made it up the Darwinian scale into success and monetary success and business success. They'd have to be eliminated. But of course, if they got wind of it, there could be an uprising, so they had to make a secret war. And it's not so secret today. It's out in the open under various guises that we must bring the population down one way or another. There's not enough food, and all of the various crises they're creating. Now, that again was part of the plan back in the early 1900s. Big international corporations were to be heavily funded to take over the entire food supply of the planet. That was part of the agenda. And then by doing so, they could tighten the reins, bring it in, and then declare eventually there was a food crisis.
And adulterate the food.
Adulterate it, absolutely. The chemicals are in it. Are not there just for preserving the food. It's also to alter you. People have become terribly sick, and the IQ has dropped over the last 50 years or so.
And the sperm count.
And the sperm count is way down as well. So none of this is by chance, and now they've admitted that there's a particular substance in soy which they pushed mightily back in the 60s and 70s as a substitute for meat, and had so many people go on it. Males who've been on it, their sperm count is down 70% lower than those who are not.
And it also is now associated with breast cancer, but they tell women eat it for breast cancer, and now, I mean, they're all getting breast cancer, and it's just the government will have all these big pageants and anti-cancer rallies with celebrities and everyone fighting it together, making it like some great, ooh, you've got it too. Ooh, it's like having a cold. Oh, the government, let's take more vaccines. They love us. And now, in the past, they would just take troops out in the field and nerve gas them. Now it's getting widespread, where I've been looking at the numbers, and then they're all calling me now going, yes, almost everybody's been in the military. When they hit about 45, they're getting the cancer now, even in families that never had cancer.
Yes,
but then even more of the troops are just dropping dead when they give them the shots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've talked to some of them, too, and they phone me up when they come back, and they tell me they were given all kinds of medications, and they're not told what these medications were. They were told to open their mouths every morning. The sergeant comes along and pops these pills in their mouth, they make sure they swallow them too. And these are all tests they're doing on different sections of the military. I'm sure it's to affect their mind as well. They're trying to create this good killer robotic type soldier who will not suffer with flashbacks when he gets home.
Well, the head
memory.
Well, the head futurist, Dr. Marshall at the Pentagon, said that in Wired magazine, as you know.
That's right. So this is at the age where science is supposed to rule, and dominate. And all this began hundreds of years ago with the old alchemists, the Fraternity of Alchemy, who said that they would always keep the advanced sciences to themselves. That was part of their oath. And by doing so, they'd take power over kings, queens, and governments, because those governments would need them to create the war machines. But ultimately, they would rule in what they called a logical manner, where the world would be run by the superior ones using logic.
And to them, they say, logically, might makes right, survival of the fittest, social Darwinism, and they point blank say in their books and thousands of different footnotes, we are going to build a worldwide control grid. We're going to kill 90+% of you, and we're going to do it for the betterment of us. And to them, that's logical.